You're about to get some booktube shoutouts, a TBR, and a wrap, all in the one video. Come July, a lot of my favourite booktubers make a video where they review their favourite reads of 2023. And that gives me all the excuse I need to pick 12 booktubers and read one of their favourite books. And just a quick caveat before I start shouting out booktubers, every time I make one of these videos, I get a comment saying, why didn't you include me? And I can confirm that if you are a booktuber and I didn't include you in this video, I don't watch your channel.
Emotional, damn it!
I'm only joking. I couldn't possibly include everybody I watched in this video. There are just too many of you. Some of you picked favourite books that I have already read. Some of you picked favourite books that aren't easily accessible to me. And some of you didn't even upload a video telling me your favourite books, which is quite frankly rude. I have a great range of booktubers to tell you about. There is a content creator for everybody here. So make sure to check out anybody who you're unfamiliar with after this video. Let's start with Veronica from Tutankhamun Reads. Veronica reads a lot of African literature, a good mix of speculative and literary fiction, translated fiction, and a lot of really interesting sounding non-fiction books. I have said this before, and I think I will continue to say it whenever I mention Veronica. She is the booktuber who adds the most books to my TBR. She reads books that nobody else reads, and I understand why she picks up literally every novel she reads. So every novel she reads, I want to know her opinions on. She's a truly hidden gem booktuber who you really need to check out. And the book that she really liked is Venomous Lumpsuckers. Next booktuber is Kelly from Curatorially Yours, the Aussie booktuber you should follow for Aussie Book Prize content and non-Book Prize Aussie book content. She also reads a variety of international literature and commercial fiction, another lesser known bookish gem, and somebody I don't see a lot of people mentioning, so please check her out. She's a great booktuber. Her favourite book was Chai Time at Cinnamon Tea Gardens. Now, I actually DNF'd that book last year, but it was at a time where I had too many books out from the library, and I had to trim the selection, and I was really harsh with my DNFing, so I think it's fair to give it another chance. Next up is Bex from Sniffing the Sheets. I think Bex is the newest booktuber in this list, and she is absolutely fantastic. Really good production in her videos. I always like it when a booktuber gets all those little things right, like the framing of a shot, the editing, the lighting, because it shows that they are thinking about the video that they're making and they care about the end product and they're considering the viewer and how to make their videos good, which means they usually make great videos, which is exactly what Bex does. She has a really well-balanced reading diet. There's translated literature, new release, classics, literary fiction, commercial fiction. She reads authors like Miko Kawakami. She read Rebecca from Daphne du Maurier, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and Small Worlds by Caleb Azuma Nelson, which incidentally is her favourite book of the year so far. I need to confess that I started reading this book months and months ago. I had an e-arc, but had was the pivotal word in that last sentence. And I put it down for a little bit as I had a uni assignment, and I may have picked up another book or another 3 books. You know, I'm a magpie, it happens. I lost track of the date, and suddenly I didn't have the e-arc anymore. That's a little bit of a lie. I never had track of the date to begin with. I'm looking forward to getting back to this, and it's also one of my favourite subscriber Janet's best read of the year so far, so I'm doubly looking forward to this one. Sarah from Eyes on Indie. If you like indie press books and you don't follow Sarah, just do it now. She is a champion of the little companies publishing interesting literature, and there are so many of them and so many authors who are so good I didn't realise were published by indie presses until I started watching Sarah. She's always producing these brilliant and very dangerous videos, because you generally want to buy every book she mentions, where she discusses all the books being released by indie presses. Sarah's channel has gone from a channel I didn't know about 6 months ago to one of my absolute favourite channels, and you really need to check out her thumbnail game. It's awesome. Sarah's book is At the Edge of the Woods, and I'm sure you'll be surprised to know that it's published by $2 Radio, a tiny independent publisher. Jess at Stalking Kafka. I am so happy to see Jess get some growth on her channel this this year, and hopefully this will just continue and accelerate because she really should be massive. She's funny, interesting, intelligent, and silly. If you can embrace just a little bit of chaos and silliness, Jess will become one of your favorite booktubers ever. She is an amazingly intelligent woman. She reads literary fiction and classics and the very occasional piece of commercial stuff for flavor, and no prizes for guessing her favorite author. Now, her pick is Tin Man by Sarah Winham. Heather from Soggy Expat Book Nerd. Heather is passionate about Welsh literature. She is an American who has settled in Cardiff. Fun fact, scientists have studied Heather and found that it is clinically impossible to watch one of her videos and not be in a better mood after. She is the booktube equivalent of hugging a puppy or eating ice cream. She is bookish dopamine. Heather's taste in books could basically be described as Heather saw some books and got distracted by them. Her favourite book this year is Patricia Wants to Cuddle. Smitty from Sant reads. Okay, so I've just said scientific fact, watching Heather will make you feel good, but Smitty is the same. She is an injection of joy straight into your veins. Lots of personality, lots of emotions, just wonderful. There is a lot of love when she enjoys a book, and there is a lot of shit emojis on her screen when she doesn't enjoy a book. Lots of translated fiction, Indian fiction, because obviously she loves book prizes, literary fiction, thriller, romance, and basically all the books except for the bad ones. She does not like the bad ones. But I really like it when she reads the bad ones, because when she trash talks a book, she does it with style. And Funny Boy is her book. Sarah from Your True Shelf. I discovered Sarah earlier this year thanks to the Women's Prize plot alongs. And you know when you discover a new booktuber, most of the time they're just like this tiny new booktuber who is just beginning, but then sometimes you discover somebody and they've got 1,000 subs, they comment on all of your friends' videos, they read all the same types of book as you, and they've been making videos for years and years, and you're wondering, how did I miss you? That's Sarah. Also, she's a doctor, which I think is such an impressive job, and I'm always impressed when people have like intelligent bookish opinions and then they have skills that are so completely different to the bookish brains that they demonstrate on their channel. Her pick is A Place for Us. Gemma from Gem of Books. I find it kind of impossible to think that you're a long-term subscriber and you haven't checked out Gemma yet. Gemma is notorious for loving pineapple on pizza and books that slowly remove your heart, delicately place it in a meat grinder and lovingly grind it into a pool of acid. I'm not saying Gemma is a monster, but if a dog dies in a book, she wants to know about it. So yeah, I really like Gemma's bookish taste. And the book that she likes is Five Little Indians. Jen the Librarian. I feel like you should all know about Jen. She is the champion of LGBT literature on Booktube. She talks about all the new and recent released queer books, as well as all the backlist and classic queer books. She also loves classics, and we share a love of Thomas Hardy. And by the way, just a general hatred of conservative politics. I particularly enjoy Jen's love for collecting old tacky book covers. Whenever she shows you one, I get the same joy out of seeing it as when somebody tells a really, really bad dad joke. You know, when the jokes are so bad that you think actually making this joke worse makes it better. Jen collects covers of books that have the same appeal. She just belongs in everybody's subscription list. She puts the badass into Librarian, and the book that Jen loved was Joan. Ben reads good. Ben's channel has exploded onto Booktube this year. He does these thoughtful and really balanced reviews of mostly new release literary fiction, some translated fiction, and the occasional less serious novels such as Heartstopper. Rather than simply saying, I love this book, I hated this book, Ben is very good at saying what aspects worked for him and which aspects didn't work for him, which is just such a useful and good review, because it's so easy to see that when Ben loves a book that might not work for me, or when Ben didn't love a book that might work for me. Makes him a fantastic reviewer. He's big into book prizes, and you know you're getting a quality video when you watch one of his. And if you watch Ben regularly, it should come as no surprise that the novel of his I'm picking is Preamble. I have one more booktuber to talk about, and I've done something different when selecting a book for this booktuber. Sean the Book Maniac. Sean is the booktuber who first encouraged me to DNF. He's charismatic, funny, and his blouse tube game is on point. He reads one type of book, literary fiction, preferably with either a queer character or a middle-aged to older woman as the protagonist. Sean likes beautiful writing and emotional connection. Sean's best reviews are when books make him feel an emotion, be that he loves the book or he hates the book. Sean's tongue can be quite elegant or quite barbed. But enough about his sex life. Sean is not afraid to say when a book doesn't work for him, and many of Sean's followers only read books that he hates. Sean and I don't always agree. Actually, more often than not, we disagree. So I'm not going to pick his favourite book, but I'm also not going to pick his least favourite book. Usually, I prefer to learn what booktubers like and how they match with what I like, where our tastes intersect. And Sean and I both love emotional character-focused novels. With Sean, if the book isn't emotional in some ways, he's not going to be finishing that book. Every book he recommends is ticking that emotional box. That leaves us with characters. So instead of reading Sean's favourite book, I'm reading the book with his favourite character. The Little Blue Encyclopedia for Vivian by Hazel Jane Plant. Sean's favourite character is the unnamed protagonist from this book. This book was also recommended by Say Kevy on one of Sean's bite-sized bookish chats, and you should always listen to Kevy when it comes to trans girl literature. 12 books, 12 booktubers. Let's see how I got on. And we're going to start with the worst and go on to the best. And we're going to start with the only book of the 12 that I didn't like. The only one I DNF'd. And I'm really, really sorry, Jess, but it's Tin Man. This is the second Sarah Winman book that I have attempted, and it's the second one I've DNF'd. She's just not an author for me. It's her writing style that I really don't get along with. I feel like she starts her book in the middle without introducing anything at all. There are too many characters doing things together all at once. And I need things to happen one at a time. I need either a character to exist in my head or a relationship to exist before dialogue makes sense to me. And I really struggle to remember dialogue without having that structure to connect it to. I'm gonna be honest, I thought that I'd DNF this one really, really quickly. But when I looked it up, I got a third of the way through this. And I cannot tell you a single thing about this book. It may as well have been Lorem Ipsum. There are just too many books to try, too many books to read. I am going to avoid her future novels, regardless of the love they get. She's just not an author that works for me. 1 DNF out of 12 books is an absolutely amazing ratio for me. To put this into perspective, I am a huge DNFer. Between 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 books I begin get dumped. My basic aim with a DNF is to only finish books that I enjoy. And for these 12 novels at least, I was successful. That means I have 11 good books to tell you about. And the next 7, there's really not a lot to separate them. A combination of pettiness and mood, really. But the next book I want to discuss is Funny Boy by Shairam Salvadure. And it's truly a case of second last doesn't mean it wasn't a wonderful read. This book was published back in 1994 and it has become a queer Sri Lankan classic, which is how the word funny is intended. Queer. It's about a young boy coming to terms with being gay and the stigma around that. And this is happening in the background of Sri Lanka's civil war. And our protagonist isn't just young and gay, but he's also Tamil. I really enjoyed the peek inside the gay experience, or the coming to terms with being gay experience. The association with femme things, dressing up as a woman with his sisters instead of playing cricket. I really understood the impact of the family pressure to not turn out that way and to have the father blaming the mother for him being funny. But the thing that really sold me on this book was the anger this boy felt towards the first boy he liked. His way of processing his attraction to men was to be angry with his first crush. The process of overcoming that internalized homophobia that I guess all gay men have to go through, doing that with a child was such a good way to show the effects of societal homophobia on the gay population, especially the young gay population. I grew up in the 90s and I had a friend who was gay and I knew I couldn't couldn't tell people that he was gay. Not just because he would get bullied, but I would get bullied for being his friend. There was very much a, if you're not homophobic, you must be a homo sort of attitude. So I could really imagine that combination of romance and shame that he would have been feeling when he was first developing feelings towards men. I could imagine how anger would be a very rational, emotional response. I felt like I could see into my friend's head when I was a young teenager and see his emotions in this character. I just thought that this was superbly created. I also think having one of the boys be Tamil and the other being Ceylonese is brilliant. The doubling up of homophobia with racial identity, it really brings in this civil war element that is so important to this book. This is a really powerful book, and I can see why it is taught in so many schools. There is a lot of meat on the bones of it to be dissected, but there are two reasons that I didn't put this much higher in my list. The individual are a little disjointed. Maybe the author was just writing and didn't know where the story was going. Maybe a little bit of foreshadowing would have helped. But really, I think that's a minor complaint. My big problem with this book was it was uncomfortably fat phobic. I know that is a product of the times it was written in. But fat characters being the bad guys in this book, it wasn't offensive so much as lazy and poor writing. And it's a real pity because he's shown he is capable of writing so much better in other sections. It just took me out of the book. And I want to say that this book has aged really badly, but it really hasn't. It's just the fat phobia that's aged really badly. It's fine to have fat characters be your bad guy, but you have to develop them. They're not bad because they're fat. They're bad because they do bad things. Otherwise, this is a really amazing debut novel. Patricia Wants to Cuddle Samantha Lee Allen. This is a novel about the filming of The Bachelor or a Bachelor type show where the contestants go to some sort of isolated island or park or something, and there's basically a Bigfoot stalking them. It's a camp comedy horror. It is ridiculous, and I was really in the mood for it. Let's be honest, this is not a particularly good piece of literature, but it was fun and it was doing exactly what it intended to do. And it was doing it well. There is really not a lot that I can say about this without recapping the plot, but I hope Allen follows it up with Godzilla Attacks Survivor or There's a Vampire in the Big Brother House. The perfect silly book for vegging out, switching off and enjoying something altogether stupid. Also, it was queer positive and feminist. It just fun. A Place for Us, Fatima Fareen Misra. This is a book about a Muslim Indian American family of 5. On the day of Hadiya, the oldest child's wedding, Amar, the youngest child, returns after not seeing his family for 3 years. We then flash back into different people's memories of the past. Events such as the time that Amar started a household petition to get his sister Huda a pair of shoes help set the scene to build a family dynamic. Then we start to see a darker history of the family. We learn that Amar's absence is more to do with his history of substance abuse, a tale of heartbreak, and his rejection of faith. But this book isn't really about addiction. It isn't about loss, heartbreak, or religion, but rather the relationship between the various members of the family. I love the relationship between Rafiq and Amar, between father and son. Each member of the family gets a turn to tell their version of the events, and the father's voice comes last, and it makes their relationship make sense. It's really touching and emotional. Because everybody has a turn out narrating, you're excluded from characters' internal dialogues, motivations, and thoughts until it is their turn to speak. And each iteration of events adds a layer of understanding, of complexity and depth. As a result, it took me a little bit of time to get into this book. It is quite long and it just grew on me the longer it went. Maybe it could have done with a few less pages, but it really did work. Just an emotionally packed novel about a family who love each other badly. Small Worlds, Caleb Azuma Nelson. I would have loved this book so much more if it were the first Caleb Azuma Nelson book I read. But despite this being incredible, my first thoughts on this are it is too similar to Open Water. I was watching Bex talk about getting to see Caleb Azuma Nelson at an event near her, and he said that this was the second book in a trilogy. While the characters aren't related and the plots don't link, I can really see why Azuma Nelson considers Open Water and Small Worlds related. They are very similar, both stylistically and thematically. A young Ghanese Englishman is at an age where he is finishing school and he's going to uni for the first time. He's falling in love, he's fighting with his father, he's becoming independent, becoming friends with his mother, rediscovering his roots, seeing his friends move out in different directions, figuring out what family and friends mean to him. He is fighting depression, fighting the cultural expectations around mental health. It discusses issues around the treatment of the black population by cops in London. And I love that Azuma Nelson brings poverty into it. I especially love the line, "Only hungry people steal rice." This has been written in Azuma Nelson's soon-to-be trademarked beautiful prose. There are bits in the second person similar to Open Water, but most of this is written in the first person through our protagonist Stephen's eyes. And I can really tell that Azuma Nelson has not so much loved a woman completely, but worshipped her from the way that he writes the women his characters love. This is a book for me that just confirms I'll probably read everything Azuma Nelson writes. He is so talented, but it does raise alarm bells that he may just be a one-trick guy. Although it's a pretty good one trick to have if that's all he's got. At the Edge of the Woods, Catherine Bromwich. A woman turns up in the Italian Alps. She spends her days wandering the woods, cooking simple meals, gardening. She translates medical documents and tutors local children. Bromwich is simply a wonderful writer. She's managing to make all this feel restorative, feel healing, while also building this sense that the woman doesn't fit in, that she isn't right. She is at times really posh, while at other times really common. She almost has this witch-like feel to her, and all of this plays into this feeling that she is an outsider in the town, that the town will never accept her, which is a thematic thing that comes up later in the book. It's a repeat. But it creates this anachronistic feel. Our protagonist feels very modern, while the town feels like it is stuck in the 1950s. And all of these contradictions should feel like they're inconsistencies. But the thing that is so good is that they make complete sense. They don't feel wrong. They just help create the scene, the characters, and the setting wonderfully. A lot of this book is this woman's daily life, but the writing is just so captivating, and there is always this sense that there is something bubbling under the surface that you just don't quite get yet. Bromwich creates tension with the mundane, a mystery that you don't understand, but you keep flicking the pages because you want it explained. Why is she here? And then things slowly start to unravel, and you get this great portrait of her past. You start to understand why she might have left, why she is here, and it creates more tension to drive you on, and you see the similarities between her past and her present. This is nature writing meets feminist literature. It is a very simple novel, and I would have liked to seen it to tackle just a little bit more thematically, but it is an excellently executed novel. It focuses a lot on setting, which is something that I normally don't care for, but it complements the building of the characters just so well. It just shows off the author's absurd talent. And if you often disagree with me about slow, thoughtful books, if you often find yourself going, no, that's a good book, you're wrong, I think you will really love this, because it's a slow, thoughtful book that I liked. I could really see this appealing to people who like Catherine Lacey or Indelicacy by Amita Kane, Chai Time at Cinnamon Garden, Shankari Chandran. So I finished this book, and then within hours it was announced that it had won the Miles Franklin Literary Award, the best Australian novel of the year. And I agree, and it is a good one for Australia September Prompt 3. I did mention before that I DNF'd this book last year, and I've come back to it and I've really enjoyed it. And I think there's two things going on here. There's a lot to be said about not borrowing 30 books from the library and realizing that you can't finish them all and stressing out. But there's also something to be said about waiting for the right mood to read a book. I also want to point out that this book does have a lot of negative reviews online because the title doesn't really match the contents. This is not a warm, cozy book. Chai Time at Cinema Gardens is a book about violence towards refugees, about racism, and it includes scenes of torture. It is also the second book in this video to deal with the Sri Lankan Civil War. Cinnamon Gardens is a nursing home in Western Sydney. It's run by a Sri Lankan family and they look after a diverse range of people. They offer a diverse range of food. They ask their residents what their favourite food was when they were a child, and they make sure that that food appears within a rotating menu. And as white families began to avoid the nursing home, Cinema Gardens began to cater more and more towards ethnic families and includes an ethnic workforce, including one Tamil man who is hounded by thugs and PTSD. Central to this story is two blended families, brown wives with white husbands. One husband has learnt how to cook dosas and several curries, and the other husband finds a statue of Captain Cook at Cinnamon Gardens and begins to investigate as his political career seems to unravel in the direction of the local toilet. The book is essentially about immigration, race, and racism, but it centres immigrants, the businesses they build, the customs they keep, and it looks specifically at how Sri Lankan refugees and white Australians can integrate well or poorly, and how that really depends so much more on white people. I really enjoyed the plot in this book too. Five Little Indians, Michelle Good. A group of Cree children were stolen from their families and forced to attend a residential school. This book follows 5 of them as they try to adapt to life after school without skills, support, family, money, or an idea of the dangers of the world that they are in. One of the things I found shocking about this novel was the naivety of the characters and the difference in worldliness between somebody who was fresh out of residential school and somebody who had been out for a few months. This book touches on a lot of issues relating to the Indigenous Canadian discussion, but one thing that I think Michelle Good did so well was to explore some stereotypes and to demonstrate the system of abuse that pushes Indigenous people towards those things. And I think she was so successful at doing that because she was writing from a place of compassion rather than judgment. And it sort of reshapes the argument from what is a really racist place, such as saying things like Indigenous people are all alcoholics or they all go to jail, rather than having an argument about that. Good is changing it there to say, well, these are the things that Canada does that makes it more likely that Cree people will go down these paths. It's not the fault of the individual, but it's the fault of the system. If you remove all support, what do you think the outcome will possibly be? As an Australian reading this, I could see a lot of issues represented in our colonial attitudes, in our terrible treatment of our Indigenous people. But one issue that we don't have in common with Canada, because we're an island without borders, is the issue of Indigenous people crossing between Canada and the US. Now, I don't pretend to understand this issue. I can imagine that there are some practical issues that need solving and some racist dogma that gets brought up to distract from solving those issues. But it was fascinating to see that being covered from a Indigenous point of view. This book is at times devastatingly sad. There are some really, truly horrible things in it, but it isn't one note. There are happy scenes, there is healing, and there is love in it too. And it feels like a really fair representation of all the big events in life. This book also must have been a publisher's dream because it does exactly what it says it will on the cover, and it does it well. I cannot see how anybody would pick this book up willingly and want to read it and then give it a negative review. If you think this sounds like a book for you, just get yourself a copy and read it. The worst thing you will say is it was just merely good. Venomous lumpsuckers. Ned Bowman. People use the word dystopian to describe this novel, and that's true in the same way that Life of Brian is a historical fiction. Technically accurate, but somewhat missing the point. This book is pure social criticism. It's comedy and satire. It is hilarious, but it is making a point. The more you laugh, the more you realize that the world we live in is truly broken. Is it funny? Or is it depressing? Yes, it is. In this world, extinction credits exist. Got a business idea that might kill an entire species? Just buy an extinction credit. It's a normal part of trade. They've even been floated on the free market. So if you think a big business is about to kill a whole bunch of creatures, you might want to buy some yourself. The price will probably go up and you can make a profit. And this is a take on the absolutely idiotic system that is carbon credit, and it proves to be just about as effective. The storyline of this novel involves some unlikable corporate type who believes his company has accidentally killed the last surviving venomous lumpsucker, an intelligent fish. And as he has been embezzling his company's extinction credits, this is not great news for him, and he goes on a mission to find more venomous lumpsuckers. For company, he has a suicidal environmental scientist who has her own agenda for finding the last surviving venomous lumpsucker. My favourite line from this novel is at a business event where a whole bunch of high rollers are discussing how many creatures their company has wiped out this year. Everybody is worried about losing their 10,000 a year. What is this, an Austen novel? This is a novel about conservation, climate change, neoliberalism, corruption, and human nature, all dressed up as a slapstick dystopian novel, but it's a very real take on the world we are currently living in. Little Blue Encyclopedia for Vivian. Little Blue is an absolutely ridiculous television show, and it was Vivian's favourite show. Vivian is dead, and our protagonist has written this encyclopedia about her favourite television show. Through it are notes and comments about Vivian's favourite character, or the time they watched episode 4 together, or what she thought about this scene, or conspiracy theories. This gives the book this shape of alternating between funny and building this very emotional relationship. Hazel Jane Plant has done an amazing job of controlling the reader's emotion. We're talking about this television show where for no reason one character speaks Danish and nobody acts like that's abnormal. In fact, they just keep talking English back to him like they completely understand everything he says. It's so quirky and stupid in the best possible way. But I feel like this book is top heavy with the stupidity and the comedy, and as it develops we get more into this relationship between these two trans women, but there are always little bits of happiness between the sad parts. This is a book about loss, about friendships, about soulmates, identity, being outrageously yourself, which is what Vivian has in common with the show Little Blue. They're not folding to expectation, they're just being them. So I was reading this because Sean loved the protagonist of this book, and she is great. But Sean, why wasn't Vivian your favourite character? Because we see Vivian through her best friend's eyes, and it's written with so much love. You can't help but to love Vivian. It really wouldn't surprise me to learn that Hazel Jane Plant has lost a friend that she has based Vivian on, and that this is more of a love letter to one of her friends. This is a beautiful coming of age story. I want to say this is a beautiful romance. It's not a romance, it's about best friends, not friends to lovers, just two people becoming best friends. It's a friend-man, a platonic romance. I don't know if that's a genre, but maybe it should be. And the beauty of this novel is broken up with descriptions of the stupidest TV show ever, because what do you like to do with your friends? I like to laugh. Big recommendations for this book. Preamble. This is a really short book, but it ends up been a real grower. The longer this book went on, the more I was sold. And you'd think that I'd want it to be longer because of that, but I think it did everything it needed to do with great efficiency. It is the story of a young woman, the daughter of a maid to a rich family. And look, I don't want to tell you about the plot in this book because it's short and spoilers, but it is great. It's about class and race and gender and how these things affect the way you're treated. It's done really well, but there is so much more to this novel than just this story. The chapters are super short, and between the chapters are recipes or song lyrics. And this does this really wonderful job of taking this story from a personal event and making it about the community, about the setting, about Preamble, about this town in this island of Mauritius. This is what the book really is. The girl in this novel isn't special, both thematically and in the sense that she could be anybody within this township, that she represents the community. So do the recipes and the song lyrics. What you're left with is not so much this very simple but powerful story, but a sense of the lives of the people within this community, a sense of place. Preamble is just a fantastic book that has achieved what it has set out to do wonderfully. And I'll be saying exactly the same thing about the next book I discuss, which is my favorite book from this video. And I found it very easy to pick my favorite book. But thinking back on it, this list really represents a collection of fantastic books that were all executed fantastically. And ranking these in order is probably a lot more about the mood that I was in than it is about the quality of the books. I really don't have a lot of bad things to say about any of these books. But my favourite book from this list was Joan by Catherine J. Chen. This is a historical fiction about Joan of Arc that focuses on her lives and achievements and not on her trial. I don't know how much of this was taken from research and how much of this is the author's invention. And when you look at figures like Joan of Arc, especially powerful female figures from history, we often get this biased narrative of historians who were researching her life and doing it through a patriarchal lens. And that's where we get things like the witch trials, the supernatural power from God. These things are embellished to give her a supernatural feel, because women, you can't hope to become Joan. She was special. She was divine. She had powers. But in Chen's book, what we are getting is this woman, this powerful, strong woman, this skilled fighter, this military commander, this peasant woman, this woman that women can aspire to be. I love that Chen is able to show us Joan the woman and the struggles of being a woman, but to also show us that Joan is from a lower class and the class struggles that Joan had too. But to break them up in such a way that I can see the difference between the class struggle and the gender struggle, to see how it would be different if she was a high-born woman or a low-born man. When I review books, I have various elements I think about. Plot, this was really engaging. Characters, built both well and efficiently, and they were just so easy to invest in. Writing, digestible, and had great flow and rhythm to it, and it was only as complex as it requires. Setting, the 100-Year War and the state of France at the time really came through. Themes, feminism, power, class, control, rags to riches, coming of age. These are some of my favorite go-to themes. And then it's a historical fiction. I've got to learn something from an historical fiction, and I did. I don't think this book is trying to do anything too unusual, but what it's trying to do, it's doing perfectly. When I think about literature, I often divide it into two categories: anesthetic or escapist literature, and aesthetic or concerned with feelings or emotions and life. But this book has really delivered on both aspects. I can really see Joan working for people who enjoy Greek myth retellings, Sally Rooney, or the Bronte sisters. And what I think that is so good about this book is whichever one of those readers you think you are, you're going to see those elements in this book first. first. This book just got me at an ideal time. This was exactly the sort of book that I was in the mood to pick up when I picked it up, and it delivered. I had a good time reading 11 of these 12 books, but what I really liked about reading the books for this video was just the sheer variety of good books I got. I didn't feel like any two books were similar from this list. It was just pleasurable to fall from book to book. I really do recommend you pick some of your favorite booktubers and write yourself a list. It's fun. If you're not familiar with any of the booktubers I listed in this video, please do go check them out. Watch some of their videos. They are 12 of my favorites. None of them knew I was doing this, so let's see if we can give them a surprise subscriber jump. I would like to do a similar experiment to this later in the year where I compare recommendation from booktube creators and recommendation from booktube viewers. So if you have a book you think I would like, please recommend it in the comments and I might read it for that experiment. I'll be only picking books that I haven't already read and that I have easy access to. Feel free to include up to 5 books. If you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button. It really helps the channel a lot, and consider subscribing if you're not already. I do this video twice a year, so if you want to binge on more similar backlist content, I've made you a playlist. Click over here. Bye bye.